anyone have anything to say?
Any comments?
I'm just curious, at the time of that decision, were you thinking, as you preached it, that I can do this with integrity or I can make cash? I mean, was that really?
I'm not 100% clear on my psychology right at that moment, but I think that I was trying my best not to think about what the Bible said. But I did know it.
Right.
I did know it. I knew it was right.
That's what I was thinking. When we bring that to mind, it makes a difference when we're consciously trying.
Right.
Versus trying to.
If someone had come up to me and said, look, you know what's right, you shouldn't be doing this, I probably would have done the right thing. But I was able to just kind of forget about that, avoid that thought long enough to make the decision. But, yeah. But it ended up costing me more money in the end than I saved in the beginning, so it wasn't worth it.
I often hear this passage talked about in terms of a Sabbath rest. Does this passage, do you believe this passage has application to the fourth commandment, the Sabbath?
As to whether or not it continues, or?
About setting aside a day, or do we live in that Sabbath rest? And you hear those arguments.
Yeah. Here's what I would say. This passage provides a big part of the theological background to the fourth commandment and to the idea of having a certain day. So this passage doesn't say that you have to have a certain day. Not here. It doesn't say that you have to have a certain day. It says that the Christian life is a promised land in and of itself. However, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have a certain day set aside for specifically commemorating that fact or celebrating that fact. Jesus' resurrection was the beginning of that promised land, right? That's the reason why we do it on the first day. That's the reasoning that the church has had. Jesus initiated that promised land, so on the day of his resurrection, when it all started, we commemorate that day every week, for the rest of time. I don't think if you just had this passage, you wouldn't be able to say one way or the other as to whether we should have a day. As to the broader question of whether the fourth commandment still applies, I don't think this really deals with that either. Maybe you do, I don't know.
It's an open question for me.
Yeah.
I fight with it.
Yeah.
I just didn't know if you had given it any consideration or in your studies that had come up.
The commentators do talk about it. My personal opinion is that this text doesn't really apply to that discussion. But I'd be open to arguments that it does. There's also a lot of debate among commentators as to whether or not the rest that's being talked about is heaven or whether it starts now. And I would say on the basis of the fact that it's of the one phrase in the text, we who have believed do enter into that rest, present tense, seems pretty clear to me that you enter by believing. But starts now. Yeah.
So I guess my question is, God says, the first part is saying, don't harden your hearts as in rebellion, and God says that he swears that they will not enter my rest. Is that, he wouldn't say that to a Christian who's already saved, right? I guess I'm kind of, is it exhorting us not to sin? Or is it how can a Christian harden their heart?
The main point of this passage is don't apostatize. That is, don't turn away from the Christian faith and go back to Judaism. That was, to its original audience, that's what it meant. So for them to go and sacrifice again bulls and goats, like it talks about other places in Hebrews, that would have been to turn away from Christ as your sacrifice. That would have been to turn away from the gospel itself. It says, you'll notice in verse 14, we didn't really talk about this. It says, for we have become partakers of Christ if we hold the beginning of our faith steadfast to the end. In other words, the fact that you hold fast to the end is the only way to prove that you actually had it in the first place. If you don't hold fast to the end, it shows that you didn't have it in the first place. So we need to always be on our guard that we maintain our faith. Because if we do fall away and apostatize, this curse will apply to us. That will mean that we never had the faith in the first place. If you want to dig a little deeper in. But there is, if you are truly a child of God, He will keep you. But you better make sure of that. So the Bible talks about making your calling and election sure. So that doesn't mean we don't worry about it and aren't concerned. So I think this curse is something we all need to be afraid of. But only in the sense of making sure that we're actually believing the Scripture. I mean, it's not that hard to know whether you're believing or not. You just have to read it and make sure you believe that it's true, and then you're good. So we just need to make sure. Does that? Anybody else? All right.